The desk shook when the cop drove Bumpy Johnson's face into the wood hard enough to ring the room. Men leaned in, expecting blood, expecting Bumpy to break. Harlem held its breath. The precinct smelled of damp wool and old paper, the kind of smell that lived where men waited to be made smaller. A radiator ticked in the corner like a clock that didn't care who you were. Bumpy Johnson sat straight, hands open on his knees, wrists bare, eyes calm. They wanted him to fidget. They wanted him to plead. They wanted his breathing to change. Across the desk, the cop kept his hat on. The brim threw a shadow over his eyes and made him look braver than he was. 2 uniforms watched from the doorway. A plainclothes man sat on a bench with a notebook he wasn't writing in. Witnesses, or props, same thing? Name? The cop said, though he already knew it. Bumpy let the question hang. Not defiance, reminder. You do not rush a man who understands. Time. You hear me, Johnson? I heard you. Then speak like a citizen. Bumpy's voice stayed low. A citizen doesn't need to be told how to speak. The cop's chair scraped back. He stood fast, anger pretending to be authority. He walked around the desk slowly, performing for the room. Stand up, he said. Bumpy rose without hurry. His height changed the air. The cop stepped close enough for the smell of coffee and cheap tobacco. You think Harlem makes you untouchable here? Harlem makes me responsible. The cop's hand grabbed Bumpy's collar. The motion was practiced, done in front of the others so it could be repeated later. Bumpy felt the pull, felt the line between a question and a provocation. He didn't strike. He didn't flinch. The moment wasn't about strength. It was about control. The cop jerked him forward and slammed his head onto the desk. Wood met bone with a dull crack. Papers jumped. The lamp wobbled. For a heartbeat, the room went silent the way a theater goes silent when a gun appears on stage. Blood didn't pour, not yet. But the shock rang through Bumpy's skull like a bell struck in a closed church. He tasted iron, his palms spread on the desk to steady himself. The cop kept him there, pressing, grinding his cheek against the wood as if trying to rub his name off his face. Now you're gonna answer me, the cop whispered. Now you're gonna talk. Bumpy's eyes stayed open. In the blur of the desktop he saw old scratches from other men's fear. He listened past the ringing for the room's pulse. The uniform shifted. The plainclothes man's pencil hovered, unsure whether to become a weapon or a record. Everybody was waiting for the same thing, the explosion, the sudden swing. The excuse. Bumpy understood the trap. If he turned this desk into a battlefield, they would call it justice. They would drag Harlem through the mud with him. The badge didn't need to win the fight. It only needed to win the story. So Bumpy did the one thing that took the most power. He breathed. Slow, measured, like the room belonged to him and not to the hat. The cop shoved harder. Where's the money? Where's the drop? Who's your man? Bumpy's voice came out into the wood, muffled but clear. You already know what you want to say. The cop's smile slipped. That sentence stole something from him. It reminded him he was performing for an audience that could see the seams. He yanked Bumpy upright and slapped him once, open-handed. Not for answers, for disrespect. Bumpy blinked. Slow. A thin line of blood appeared near his eyebrow, warm and patient. He didn't wipe it away. He let it sit like a signature. He looked at each witness, not asking them to be brave, telling them what bravery cost. The plainclothes man swallowed. One uniform stared at the floor. Bumpy turned back to the cop. You want me to swing, he said quietly. I want you to confess. Confession ain't what you're after, Bumpy said. You're after permission. The cop's fist twitched. For a second he might have done it again, driven Bumpy down until the desk splintered. But paperwork had its own power, and superiors liked clean lies. He stepped back, smoothing his hat brim, rebuilding his posture. "Sit," he said. Bumpy sat. The chair creaked. He placed his hands on his knees again, exactly where they had been. Before, the blood stayed. The calm stayed. He felt the ache behind his eyes, but he kept it private. Pain was a visitor. It didn't get a vote. He thought of the men on Lenox who depended on order, the old ladies who wanted quiet stairwells, the store owners who needed nights without shattered glass. A hothead could buy revenge in an hour. A leader paid for peace over years. If he gave the precinct a riot, Harlem would be billed for it. So he sat like a verdict. Let them wonder what comes next. Outside the grimy window, the city moved on. Uptown, Harlem's storefronts opened and closed. A mother counted coins for bread. A boy watched a corner and learned what mattered. In this room, the insult was done. The dare had been thrown. And the men watching learned something they hadn't expected. They learned that violence was not the only language. A powerful man could speak. Sometimes the deepest threat was silence that didn't break. Harlem did not need newspapers to know what happened. It had barbershops, church steps, pool halls, and women leaning from windows like sentries. News moved through the neighborhood the way smoke moved, quiet, unavoidable. Bumpy walked back in without announcement. He did not come flying furious, looking for a gun. He came at the same pace he always kept, hat brim low, coat buttoned, shoulders set. The cut near his brow had been cleaned, but it was still there, a thin mark of precinct wood. He let it stay visible. A lesson does no good if nobody sees it. On 135th Street, the morning had its usual music, delivery carts, a trumpet practicing somewhere off-key, a storefront radio turned down low. Yet the faces were different. Men paused mid-conversation. Few heads nodded, respectful but searching. It wasn't curiosity. It was worry disguised as manners. A runner came close, young, eager to prove himself with speed. "They'd put hands on you," he said. Bumpy didn't stop walking. "They'd put hands on plenty, but you." Bumpy lifted one finger. "Just enough." The boy swallowed the rest and fell into step behind him, learning. They reached the back room of a small business that looked ordinary from the street. The front sold cigars and combs and little necessities. The back held Harlem's real inventory: promises, arrangements, quiet protection. Inside, 3 older men waited at a table with coffee cups and serious eyes. Not soldiers. Administrators. One was a preacher without a pulpit today, collar open, hands folded as if in prayer, even when he wasn't praying. Another owned buildings and knew every tenant by name and debt. The third had once been quick with his fists, but age had taught him better. Now his strength lived in patience. They rose when Bumpy entered, not from fear, from recognition. Bumpy took his chair at the head of the table and set his hat beside him. He looked at them one at a time, giving them what they needed: steadiness. "What's the temperature?" he asked. "Hot," the building man said. "People talking." "People always talk," Bumpy answered. "Question is what they do after." "Bit." Preacher leaned forward. "They say a cop slammed your head on a desk." Bumpy nodded once. "He wanted me to swing. He wanted a reason to make Harlem pay for my pride." The patient man studied the cut. "And you gave him none." "I gave him time," Bumpy said. He stood and walked to the small window that looked out over the street. From there he could see the corner where boys learned too early, the stoop where old men argued about baseball as if it could save them, the women carrying groceries like they were carrying the whole neighborhood. "You want violence," he said. "You can find it cheap. It'll buy you an hour. Then they bring down a week of raids, a month of funerals, a year of hungry kids. Harlem don't need that." The building man asked carefully, "So what do we tell the young ones? The ones who think respect is only taken with blood?" Bumpy turned back. Tell them respect is kept with discipline. Tell them the neighborhood's name is bigger than any man's temper. The preacher's voice stayed low, and the cop? Bumpy. Returned to his seat. He didn't answer right away. He poured coffee into a cup he didn't drink. The room watched his hands. Leadership lived in small motions. If his fingers shook, Harlem would shake. He'll do what men like him do. Bumpy said. He'll brag where he thinks it's safe. He'll lean on folks to make the story stick. He'll try to turn witnesses into mouths. The patient man asked, You think people will hold? Bumpy looked at each of them, slow. They will if we make holding easier than talking. That was the work. Not revenge, structure. If a witness lost his job, someone had to slip an envelope under a door. If a woman got threatened at her stoop, someone had to walk her home without being asked. If a shop got inspected every day, someone had to buy from it, keep it alive, keep its owner from folding under pressure. Bumpy's authority was not a shout, it was a web. Every strand had a name attached to it, and every name meant responsibility. Gave instructions without theatrics. The runner was to sit at the barber shop and listen, not speak. The building man would check on families who had been hassled. The preacher would remind certain tongues, gently, that the church remembered. Who helped and who harmed. No threats. Just memory. When the meeting ended, Bumpy stepped back onto the street. The neighborhood watched him as if he were in the weather. He moved through them with respect, returning nods, touching a shoulder here, a child's head there. Every gesture said the same thing. I see you. At the corner, an old woman with tired eyes called him over. She had known Harlem before it was crowded with fear. She looked at the cut and clicked her tongue. They think they can do anything, she said. Bumpy leaned close. They can do a lot, he replied, but not everything. She studied him, searching for heat. Finding none, she found comfort instead. You come eat something later, she said. You look like a man carrying stones. Bumpy allowed a small smile that did not soften his authority. Yes, ma'am, he said. I'll come. He walked on. The insult had landed, but it had not cracked the foundation. Harlem's quiet government was awake now, steady hands, closed mouths, open eyes. The precinct wanted a spectacle. Bumpy gave them something harder to fight, a community that moved like one body, and a leader who refused to be baited into burning his own house. Not today. Not ever. The first knock came before dawn. It landed soft, polite, the kind of knock meant to say we're reasonable men. A uniform stood outside a narrow apartment where a seamstress lived with her sister and 2 children. He held his hat at his waist and smiled like a neighbor. We just want to clear something up, he said. Inside, the woman's hand shook as she tied her robe. She had seen the desk. She had heard the sound wood made when a man's head met it. She had watched Bumpy Johnson breathe through the moment like it was weather passing through a window. When the cop asked what she saw the children first. She saw rent. She saw the word trouble spelled 100 ways. I didn't see nothing, she said. The cop's smile stayed. He wrote her name anyway. Paper was a promise. By noon, the second witness sat in a diner with a plainclothes man who stirred coffee he didn't drink. The diner's bell rang with every customer, a small alarm that reminded you who was watching. You were in the room, the man said. You heard things. The witness was a porter, broad-shouldered, quiet, a man who carried other men's burdens for a living. He had learned to make his back strong and his mouth light. I heard a lot of noise, he said. Couldn't tell you what it meant. The spoon clinked against the cup. The plainclothes man leaned in. Noise becomes meaning when someone helps us. The porter met his eyes. He thought of the envelope that had appeared under his door that morning. No note, just enough to cover a week's groceries. He thought of the man who had delivered it, respectful, saying nothing. He thought of Harlem's long memory. "I'm not good with meanings," he said. "Just noise." By evening, the third witness was pulled off a stoop and into a hallway that smelled like bleach and fear. 2 uniforms flanked him. Their voices were practiced. "You don't want trouble." The witness laughed once, short. Trouble came already. "You think that man's gonna save you?" One asked. The witness shook his head. "No, I think he expects me to save myself." They stared at him, confused by a loyalty that didn't look like fear. They let him go with a warning that meant nothing to a man who understood consequences. The fourth witness worked nights, sweeping floors in an office building where men with soft hands decided hard things. He was brought in under bright lights and asked the same questions in different orders. The room was designed to tire you, to make time feel heavy. He closed his eyes and remembered Bumpy's face when the blood had appeared. Not anger, calculation, a man choosing the future over the moment. "I didn't see anything illegal," he said. "Your memory is convenient," the interrogator said. "Memory's a muscle," the witness replied. "I use it every day." The fifth witness was young and wanted to be brave. They tried flattery first, then they tried fear. Then they tried boredom, letting hours pass with no questions at all. Silence, when wielded poorly, turns on its owner. Finally, the young man spoke. "You want a story," he said. "I don't have one you can use." "You're making a mistake." He shrugged. "We all do. I picked mine." The sixth witness never made it to a room. A message reached him, instead quiet, indirect. His landlord asked if he planned to renew. His cousin found work after months of nothing. A shopkeeper refused his money and pressed a bag of groceries into his hands. The message said, "You are seen." When the precinct compared notes, the pages were thin. 6 names, 6 blanks where statements should have been. 6 reminders that pressure only works when there's a crack to push through. The cop who had slammed the desk felt the eyes on him now. Superiors asked questions with their faces. Why? Was this taking so long? Why was nothing sticking? He laughed it off, said people forget. Said he'd make them remember. He went back into the neighborhood with his chest out and his temper hidden under jokes. He leaned on corners, flashed his badge, told men he could make life small if he wanted. He did it loud enough to be heard, because performance was the point. And Harlem listened. Not with fear, with calculation. At a barber shop, a man paused mid-sentence when the cop entered. Clippers buzzed, mirrors reflected choices. The cop asked questions like he was doing favors. "Anybody talking yet?" he asked. The barber's hands didn't slow. "Talking about what?" The cop smirked. "You know?" The barber looked up, met his eyes, and shook his head once. "I know, hair." Across the street, a church door opened and closed. The preacher's sermon that night was about stewardship, about guarding what's entrusted to you, about the cost of loose tongues. No names, no threats. The pews nodded as one. In a tenement hallway, a mother whispered to her daughter about keeping doors locked and mouths tighter. In a back room, envelopes changed hands without ceremony. In a pool hall, men played slow, deliberate games and said nothing at all. Precinct escalated. They brought in a superior, a man with a careful voice who asked questions like a banker counting risk. "You understand," he said to the porter. "We can make things difficult." The porter nodded. "You always could. And you're choosing not to help us?" The porter thought of the web, how each strand held another. He thought of the desk, the dare, the patience. "I'm choosing to help my neighborhood," he said. The superior closed the file. "That's unfortunate." "It's durable," the porter replied. Word reached Bumpy without being carried. He didn't call meetings. He didn't send threats. He walked the streets as he always had, stopping where he was needed, listening more than speaking. His presence reminded people that silence wasn't empty, it was full of protection. One evening, the runner approached him, eyes bright with the thrill of endurance. "They can't crack anyone," he said. Bumpy slowed him with a look. "Don't confuse strength with noise." "Yes, sir." Bumpy stopped outside the cigar shop and watched the street breathe. He knew the cop would push harder. Men like that mistook resistance for a personal insult. He also knew something else. When people choose the same silence, it stops being coincidence. It becomes a lesson. The cop felt it in his bones before he admitted it. The city had taught him to dominate rooms. Harlem taught him rooms could dominate back. He took a drink he didn't need and laughed too loud with men who didn't trust him. He told the story again, adding details, sharpening the slam, trying to make it matter. It didn't, because the witnesses had decided something together without meeting together. They had decided that a man's restraint was worth more than a badge's anger. They had decided that memory could outlast pressure. They had decided that talking was a luxury they couldn't afford and silence was an investment. 6 witnesses. 6 refusals. One lesson the precinct couldn't write down. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it sits, breathes, and waits for others to choose it. Pressure doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it walks through the front door and smiles. The first raid hit a numbers house that had been clean for months. No arrests that stuck. Just overturned chairs, scattered slips, a message left in disarray. The uniforms lingered longer than necessary, letting the neighbors watch. Performance again. By noon, 2 shops on the same block were cited for violations no one could remember being written before. A health inspector arrived with a clipboard and a bored expression. A patrol car idled across the street like a parked threat. Harlem noticed the pattern. So did Bumpy. He stood in a doorway and watched the patrol car's engine vibrate the air. He didn't send men to confront it. He sent a boy to buy a soda from the shop across the street. He sent a woman with a basket to ask after a sick neighbor. Normalcy is a weapon when used correctly. A building owner approached him with worry creased into his face. "They're asking questions again," he said. "About you." Bumpy nodded. "They'll ask. They say you'll slip." Bumpy's eyes stayed on the street. Men who need others to slip don't understand footing. The pressure grew bolder. Uniforms showed up at funerals, hats off, eyes on the crowd. Plainclothes men leaned against lampposts outside barber shops, pretending to enjoy the weather. The cop with the hat made sure to be seen, laughing where laughter didn't belong. He cornered Bumpy once on a sidewalk, public enough to be safe, private enough to sting. "You're quiet lately," he said. "That desk took your voice?" Bumpy looked at him without heat. "You mistook noise for voice." The cop smirked. "I can make you loud." "Loud is cheap," Bumpy replied. "Try lasting." The cop stepped closer, close enough for witnesses to see the line being tested. Bumpy didn't move back. He didn't move forward. The space stayed exactly the same, like a held breath. A few steps away, the preacher stood with a group of women talking about food drives. He glanced over once, then turned back to his work. The message was subtle. The neighborhood would not orbit a badge's temper. That night, Bumpy met with the same quiet administrators, no raised voices, no maps with pins, just lists and commitments. "Keep the lights on," he said. "Pay the rents. Walk the old ones home. If they close a door, open another. If they lean, don't push back, brace." "What if they take someone?" the building man asked. "Then we take care of the family," Bumpy said. "No heroics." Pressure wants a reaction. Deny it that, and it eats itself. The cop denied spectacle, found it in small humiliations. He stopped men for nothing. He asked the same questions twice. He laughed at answers that were careful. Each move was meant to peel away loyalty, to make silence feel lonely. But Harlem had practice with loneliness. It answered with company. A porter found his shift changed and his pay cut. 2 days later, a better shift appeared somewhere else. A shop owner's windows were inspected daily. Neighbors bought more than they needed. A woman was followed home. A man walked with her the next night, then another, until the shadow got bored. The cop noticed. He felt the neighborhood close ranks, without closing fists. It made him reckless. He tried the desk again, this time with words. He spread a rumor that Bumpy had talked, that the calm was cover for cooperation. He let it slip in places where lies like to live. Bumpy countered with truth sparingly. He showed up where he always showed up. He paid what he owed. He listened. He never defended himself aloud. Defense would have given the rumor legs. One afternoon, the runner burst in with heat. "They're saying you," Bumpy raised his hand. "If a lie needs me to deny it, it's already winning." The runner swallowed. Learned again. Pressure peaked at a public hearing about community safety. Suit spoke from a table. The cop sat behind them, hat off, eyes sharp. The room was full. Cameras whirred softly. A question came from the back. "What about the incident at the precinct?" A voice asked. The suit shifted. The cop's jaw tightened. Bumpy stood now too. "Accuse, not to dramatize. Just to be present." The room felt it. "I trust the process," he said simply. The words landed heavier than any speech. They denied the cop his theater. They framed patience as confidence. The cameras moved on. Afterward, on the steps, the cop confronted him again. "You think you won?" Bumpy looked past him, at the street. "I think you're tired." The cop laughed, brittle. "This isn't over." "It rarely is," Bumpy said. Pressure had been applied in plain sight, and the neighborhood had absorbed it without cracking. The badge had learned something it hated. You could harass a man, but you could not harass a system that fed itself. The cop went home angry. He drank. He told the story again. He planned something louder. Bumpy went home calm. He ate with the old woman who worried. He listened to her complain about prices. He promised nothing he couldn't deliver. He slept, because when pressure shows itself, it also shows its limits. And Bumpy Johnson was already waiting at the edge of those limits, patient, certain, and unmoved. The mistake men like him always made was believing the climax had to be loud. The cop planned noise. He wanted a scene that would travel. He wanted a moment big enough to force hands, loosen tongues, justify bruises. He chose a busy afternoon and a familiar corner, the kind that held eyes even when nobody admitted to watching. He arrived with 2 uniforms and a grin sharpened for witnesses. Bumpy was already there. He stood outside a storefront, coat clean, hat set just so, speaking quietly with a shop owner about delivery schedules. It looked ordinary. That was the point. Ordinary things survive storms. The cop crossed the street without hurry, letting people notice the approach. Shoes on pavement, badges catching light. The uniforms fanned out, casual but practiced. "Afternoon, Johnson," the cop said, loud enough. Bumpy turned. His face showed nothing. No challenge, no retreat. Only acknowledgement. "Afternoon," he replied. The cop circled him like a man measuring furniture. "Heard you're running things again." Bumpy smiled faintly. "People run themselves." "Funny." The cop said, "Because every time I ask a question, I get the same answer, from different mouths. That happens when the answer's true." A small crowd formed without forming. Men slowed. Women paused. A bus hissed to a stop and waited longer than it needed to. The cop leaned in. "You think this ends with silence?" Bumpy's voice stayed low, forcing the cop to lean closer if he wanted to hear. "Everything ends with silence." The cop straightened, annoyed. He nodded to a uniform. Search him. The uniform hesitated, just a fraction. It was enough. The crowd saw it. Authority hates hesitation. Go on. The cop snapped out the search was clean. Too clean. Nothing found. No spectacle. No excuse. The cop's grin faltered. He tried again, louder. You got friends who like to protect you? Bumpy looked at the crowd now. He didn't ask them for anything. He simply existed among them, equal and accountable. They're not protecting me, he said. They're protecting themselves. The words landed. The shop owner stepped closer, not aggressive, just present. So did the barber from down the block. So did a porter still in uniform from his shift. 6 faces. Then more. No fists. No shouts. Just a narrowing of space that wasn't threatening until it was undeniable. The cop felt it. The way a room chooses sides without voting. You're obstructing, he barked. A woman's voice came calm from the edge. We're standing. Ah. Man added, it's a sidewalk. Another. You done searching? The cop saw the trap too late. Any move now would be public, recorded, judged. Violence would be his, not Bumpy's. The desk had taught him that lesson backward. He backed off. A step, then another. Bumpy tipped his hat, not in victory, but in closure. You have a good day, he said. The cop stared, chest rising. He wanted the slam. He wanted the break. He got dignity instead, offered like a mirror. He turned away, barking orders that meant nothing. The uniforms followed. The crowd dissolved. The way it had gathered, back into lives, back into work. No cheering. No speeches. Just continuity. That was domination. Not the taking of ground, but the refusal to leave it. That night, the cop filed reports that said little and explained less. Superiors read between the lines and saw risk. They reassigned him quietly. Not punishment. Containment. The witnesses were never called again. Bumpy walked Harlem as he always had. He checked on the porter. He paid the shop owner's delivery early. He sat with the old woman and listened to her complain again. The desk became a story that lost its teeth every time it was told. What remained was the lesson. Power does not need to raise its voice. It only needs to be agreed upon. Time did what force could not. The precinct moved on the way. Institutions always do quietly, without apology. Names shifted on assignment boards. Paperwork buried the memory under newer problems. The cop's laughter disappeared from Harlem's corners, not replaced. Just gone. Like a bad habit a body finally breaks. No announcement marked the end. No victory lap followed. That was important. Because what Bumpy had built was never meant to look like conquest. It was meant to look like stability. Harlem noticed the absence before it named it. Raids slowed. Inspections became routine again. The lamppost watchers found other posts. Streets returned to their normal negotiations, arguments, bargains, small kindnesses, petty sins. Life uninterrupted. Bumpy did not claim credit. He never explained the silence. He understood something men often forgot. If you explain power, you weaken it. Mystery keeps order longer than fear. In barbershops, the story changed shape. The slam became quieter, less graphic. The desk turned into a symbol instead of a bruise. People stopped asking why didn't he hit back and started asking, how did he make them stop? That was the inheritance. Young men learned without being lectured. They learned that rage invited attention and attention invited destruction. They learned that patience could move institutions that fists could not dent. They learned that community was not a slogan, it was insurance. One night, a boy asked him directly, "Why didn't you do something?" The boy said, restless, hungry for action. Bumpy looked at him for a long moment. The city hummed around them. "I did." he said. The boy frowned. Didn't look like it. Bumpy nodded. That's how you know it worked. The elders understood. Best. They had lived long enough to know that survival was not passive, it was strategic. They saw how Bumpy's restraint had bought them time, and how time bought dignity. They spoke his name carefully, not like a legend, but like a pillar. Years later, men would argue about that day, about whether Bumpy could have ended it differently, louder, faster, bloodier. They would miss the point, because legacy is not built in moments of fury. It is built in the hours after, when everyone waits to see what kind of world will follow. Harlem followed calm. The 6 witnesses went on with their lives. None became famous. None were rewarded publicly. That too was part of the code. Quiet courage does not seek applause. It seeks continuity. Some nights, Bumpy walked past the precinct without looking up, not out of fear. Out of indifference. The building no longer mattered. The desk no longer mattered. What mattered was that Harlem had learned something about itself, that it could choose silence together, that it could deny spectacle its oxygen, that it could protect its own without burning its future. Bumpy Johnson did not need statues or speeches. His power lived in the habits he left behind, in the way people stood closer when it counted, and stepped back when restraint demanded it. That is how order lasts, not with noise, not with threats, but with a room full of people who already know what they will not say.